Have you ever stood at a funeral, watching others cry, and felt absolutely nothing? Not sadness, not relief, just emptiness. You're not broken. You're experiencing something far more complex than most people understand. Some people receive the news of a death and feel like they should feel something, but there's just silence inside. No tears come, no grief arrives, just a strange disconnect. It's one of the most isolating experiences a person can have. Society tells us exactly how we should grieve, when we should cry, what emotions are appropriate. But what happens when your body simply refuses to cooperate? What happens when the script everyone else follows doesn't match what's happening inside you? This isn't about being cold or heartless. It's about understanding why some minds respond to loss with numbness instead of tears. It's about recognizing that emotional absence can be just as powerful as emotional presence. And it's about finally giving yourself permission to experience grief differently. The truth is, feeling nothing when someone dies often says more about your past than your present. It reveals survival mechanisms you built long before this moment. And understanding this can change everything. I remember the first time I realized I was supposed to cry at a funeral. I was young, maybe 13 or 14, standing in a room full of sobbing adults. Everyone kept looking at me, waiting for tears that never came. The guilt started immediately. What's wrong with me? Why can't I feel what they're feeling? I tried to force sadness, to manufacture tears, but my body wouldn't comply. Years later, I would learn that this wasn't a deficiency. It was a defense. My mind had learned early that feeling too much was dangerous, so it learned to feel nothing at all. When you grow up in an environment where emotions are unpredictable or unsafe, your nervous system adapts. It learns to shut down feelings before they can overwhelm you. This is called emotional numbing, and it's a survival response. Emotional numbing doesn't discriminate. It doesn't just block out pain, it blocks out everything. Joy, sadness, fear, love, they all get muted together. You can't selectively numb one emotion without dulling all the others. This is why you might feel nothing at a funeral, but also struggle to feel excitement at celebrations. Your emotional system isn't broken, it's just operating a safe mode. It's protecting you from a perceived threat that may no longer exist. The brain doesn't always distinguish between past danger and present safety. If emotions once made you vulnerable, your mind may continue treating all feelings as potential threats. This is the legacy of childhood trauma. You notice it most at funerals, because that's when the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. Everyone around you is openly grieving, and you're just observing. You're watching their pain like it's happening behind glass. Some people mistake this for strength. You're so strong, they say. You're handling this so well. But you know the truth. This isn't strength, it's absence. Strength would be feeling the pain and moving through it. The compliments make it worse somehow. They reinforce the idea that what you're experiencing is good, that numbness is admirable. But inside, you're wondering if you're even human. Here's what most people don't understand. Delayed grief is real. Just because you don't cry at the funeral doesn't mean you won't cry 6 months later in a grocery store parking lot. Emotions don't follow schedules. Your mind processes loss at its own pace, in its own way. Sometimes it needs distance before it can handle proximity. Sometimes it needs safety before it can afford vulnerability. I've seen people break down years after a death, finally allowing themselves to feel what they couldn't feel before. The grief was always there, it was just waiting for permission. It was waiting for safety. There's also the phenomenon of complicated relationships. When someone who hurt you dies, what are you supposed to feel? Relief? Sadness? Anger? Sometimes the answer is nothing, because the relationship was already dead long before they were. You can't grieve someone you never really had. You can't mourn a connection that never existed. And society's expectation that you should feel sad simply because someone died ignores the reality of toxic relationships.
Maybe the person who died was abusive. Maybe they abandoned you emotionally years ago. Maybe you already did your grieving when the relationship ended, not when their life did.
Feeling nothing in these cases isn't numbness, it's completion. It's your mind recognizing that this loss doesn't warrant the same response as losing someone who was actually present in your life. But even knowing this intellectually doesn't stop the guilt. We're taught that death erases all sins, that we should only speak well of the deceased. This makes your lack of sadness feel like a moral failure. Let me be clear. You don't owe anyone grief. You don't owe anyone tears. Your emotional response to death is valid, whatever it is or isn't. Sometimes feeling nothing is actually a sign of healthy boundaries. It means you're not performing emotions for other people's comfort. It means you're being honest with yourself about what this loss actually means to you. There's a difference between dissociation and authentic emotional absence. Dissociation feels like you're floating outside your body, watching yourself from a distance. Authentic absence feels like clarity. You're present, you're just not sad. If you're dissociating, you might notice gaps in your memory, a sense of unreality, or feeling disconnected from your body. This is your mind protecting you from overwhelming emotion by creating distance. Disassociation is temporary. It's a circuit breaker that flips when the emotional load gets too intense. Once you're in a safer space, the feelings might return, or they might not, and that's okay too. Some people experience what psychologists call absent grief. This is when someone intellectually understands a loss has occurred, but feels no emotional reaction to it. It's not repression. The person isn't pushing feelings down. The feelings simply aren't there. Absent grief is more common than we think. It happens to people who have difficulty identifying and expressing emotions. It happens to people with certain personality structures. It happens to people whose attachment to the deceased was already severed. If you're someone who feels nothing, you've probably learned to fake it. You've learned what facial expressions to make, what phrases to say, how to move through a funeral without anyone noticing your absence. This performance is exhausting. You're not just dealing with death, you're managing everyone else's expectations of how you should be dealing with death. You're grief acting. I used to watch people at funerals and study them like I was learning a foreign language. How long should I hug someone? When should I look down? What's the appropriate moment to cry? I was creating a simulation of grief. The irony is that all this performance leaves you even more disconnected from whatever authentic feelings might be trying to emerge. You're so busy pretending to feel that you can't access what you actually feel, if anything. There's also a neurological component to emotional numbness that we rarely talk about. Depression, anxiety, PTSD, and other mental health conditions can literally alter how your brain processes emotion. When you're depressed, your brain's emotional centers become less responsive. It's not that you're choosing not to feel. Your neurochemistry is preventing the feeling from registering. This is called anhedonia, and it extends to grief. Antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, and mood stabilizers can also blunt emotional responses. You might logically understand you've experienced a loss, but the emotional impact feels muted or absent. This is a known side effect, not a personal failure. Your hormonal state matters too. Chronic stress floods your system with cortisol, which dampens emotional reactivity over time. If you've been in survival mode for months or years, your capacity for acute grief may be diminished. Then, there's the simple reality of emotional exhaustion. If you've experienced multiple losses in a short period, your emotional reserves might be depleted. You have nothing left to give, even to grief. I learned this the hard way when 3 people in my life died within 6 months. The first death destroyed me. The second one made me numb. By the third, I felt nothing at all. I wasn't callous, I was empty. Anticipatory grief also plays a role. If someone has been dying slowly from illness, dementia, addiction,
You might do all your grieving before they actually die. When death finally comes, it feels like a formality. You've already mourned the person they used to be. You've already said goodbye to the relationship as it was. The physical death is just the final chapter of a loss that's been unfolding for years. This is especially common with diseases like Alzheimer's. Families often describe feeling like they lost their loved one long before the body stopped functioning. The funeral feels less like a beginning of grief and more like an ending. Cultural factors shape how we express grief too. Some cultures encourage loud wailing and visible emotion. Others value stoic composure and private mourning. If your natural response doesn't match your culture's expectations, you'll feel even more alienated. Western culture in particular has a complicated relationship with death. We hide it away, sanitize it, professionalize it. We expect grief to be tidy and time-limited. Feel sad for a while, then move on. This timeline doesn't account for the messiness of real human emotion. You might also feel nothing because you're in shock. Shock is the mind's way of slowing down information so you can process it gradually. It's not numbness exactly, it's more like suspended animation. Shock can last hours, days, or even weeks. During this time, you might function normally, handle logistics, comfort others, all while feeling completely detached. The reality hasn't landed yet. When shock wears off, one of two things happens. Emotion rushes in all at once, or the numbness continues. Both are normal. Both are valid responses to loss. There's something else we need to talk about. The difference between feeling nothing and feeling relief. Relief when someone dies is one of the most stigmatized emotions, but it's incredibly common and often healthy. If someone was suffering, relief is compassionate. If someone was abusive, relief is self-preservation. If someone's death ends years of caretaking exhaustion, relief is honest. Relief doesn't mean you didn't love them. You can feel relieved and still honor what was good. You can feel relieved and still acknowledge the complexity of the relationship. Relief and love aren't opposites. They can coexist. But admitting relief feels dangerous. It sounds like you're celebrating death, like you're cold. So you hide it, even from yourself. You translate relief into nothing, because nothing feels more acceptable than relief. Let's talk about what actually helps when you feel nothing. First, stop trying to force feelings that aren't there. Forced grief is performative grief, and it won't heal you. Instead, get curious about the absence. What is the numbness protecting you from? What would it cost you to feel this loss fully? Sometimes the answer reveals why your mind chose this particular defense. You might discover that feeling nothing is actually your way of staying functional. Maybe you have responsibilities you can't neglect. Maybe you have other people depending on you. Your mind knows you can't afford to fall apart right now. Give yourself permission to feel nothing without judgment. Say it out loud. I feel nothing right now, and that's okay. Accepting the absence is more healing than fighting it. Journal about what you observe rather than what you feel. Today, someone died. I noticed others crying. I noticed I felt disconnected. I noticed guilt trying to take hold. Observation creates space without demanding emotion. If you're worried about how you're perceived, have a simple script ready. I'm processing this in my own way. Grief looks different for everyone. I'm okay. Thank you for checking. You don't owe anyone an explanation. Consider whether you actually want to feel something, or if you just think you should. They're the difference. Wanting to connect with grief is valid. Forcing grief because others expect it is harmful. Some people find that creative expression opens emotional doors that direct confrontation can't. Writing, painting, music, these bypass the intellectual mind and access something deeper. You might not feel sad, but you might create something that expresses what words can't. Movement helps too. Grief lives in the body, even when the mind feels nothing. Walking, dancing, yoga, physical release can unlock emotional release, or at least create space for it to happen eventually. Therapy can be valuable, especially with someone who understands trauma and complicated grief. A good therapist won't pressure you to feel differently. They'll help you understand why you feel the way you do. EMDR, somatic therapy, and other body-based approaches can be particularly effective for people whose numbness stems from trauma. These therapies work with the nervous system directly, rather than trying to think your way through emotion. But here's what I want you to understand most. You're not required to grieve according to anyone's timeline or template. Your grief, or lack thereof, belongs to you alone. The people who judge you for not crying have no idea what you've survived. They don't know what defenses you needed to build to get through childhood, adolescence, or adulthood. They don't know your history with the person who died. Your emotional response is the result of 1,000 factors. Your neurobiology, your history, your current mental state, your relationship with the deceased, your capacity for feeling in this moment. It's not a moral statement. Feeling nothing doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't make you less than. It doesn't mean you're incapable of love or connection. It means you're human. And human grief is wildly varied. I've met people who sobbed for months after a death. I've met people who felt nothing for years. I've met people whose grief came in waves, years apart. I've met people who grieved the relationship, but not the death. All of them were processing loss, just differently. What troubles me most is how we punish people for not grieving correctly. We withdraw from them, gossip about them, question their humanity. We make them feel even more alone than they already do. If you're feeling nothing right now, I want you to know you're not alone. There are countless people who have stood where you're standing, feeling what you're feeling or not feeling, and they survived. You will too. The absence of tears doesn't mean the absence of impact. Death changes us, whether we cry or not. The loss registers, even when the emotion doesn't. Your life has been altered by this death, even if you can't feel it yet. Sometimes the impact shows up in unexpected ways. You might find yourself avoiding certain places, songs, or conversations. You might notice subtle shifts in how you relate to others. These are grief's fingerprints, even without tears. You might also find that your numbness protects you through the immediate crisis, but gradually lifts over time. Or you might find that it never fully lifts, and you learn to live with emotional distance as your baseline. Both paths are valid. What I've learned through my own experiences and through talking with hundreds of others is this: healing doesn't always mean feeling more. Sometimes healing means accepting how you feel, or don't feel without shame. The goal isn't to become someone who cries at funerals if that's not who you are. The goal is to understand yourself deeply enough that you can navigate loss without self-judgment. Some of the most emotionally intelligent people I know rarely cry. They process internally, they think deeply, they honor loss through action rather than emotion. Their grief is real, even when invisible. And some people who feel nothing now will feel everything later. There's no predicting which category you'll fall into, and there's no right answer. Your path through loss is yours alone. If you're someone who loves someone who feels nothing, here's what helps. Don't pressure them to cry. Don't tell them it's okay to feel. Don't make their grief about your discomfort with their lack of grief. Instead, simply be present, offer practical support, respect their process. Trust that they know themselves better than you know them. Your acceptance might be the only safe space they have. And if you're the one feeling nothing, surrounded by people who don't understand, remember this: you don't need their validation to know your experience is real. You don't need their approval to grieve or not grieve in your own way. The field of psychology is finally starting to recognize the diversity of grief responses. Terms like absent grief, inhibited grief, and delayed grief give language to experiences that were once pathologized. We're learning that the old stages of grief, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, don't actually describe how most people grieve. Grief is not linear. It's not predictable. It doesn't follow rules. You might cycle through emotions out of order. You might skip stages entirely. You might feel multiple things at once or nothing at all. All of this is normal human variation, not pathology. Research on resilience shows that some people are naturally more emotionally stable in the face of loss. They don't feel nothing because they're broken. They feel nothing because their baseline emotional regulation is different. These people often bounce back quickly from adversity, maintain functioning during crisis, and don't experience the emotional intensity others do. This is a personality trait, not a defect. Evolutionary psychologists suggest that emotional diversity in grief served an important function. Not everyone could afford to fall apart when someone died. Someone had to keep hunting, keep protecting, keep the community functioning. Maybe you're the person who keeps things running. Maybe your role has always been stability while others process emotion. Maybe your lack of feeling isn't absence, but purpose. I'm not saying your numbness is guaranteed to be healthy or adaptive. Sometimes it is a problem that needs addressing. But I am saying it's not automatically pathological just because it differs from the norm. The question isn't why don't I feel anything? The question is, does this absence serve me or harm me? Does it help me function or does it isolate me further? If your numbness allows you to stay present, make decisions, and move forward, it might be exactly what you need right now. If it's causing you distress or disconnection from your life, then it's worth exploring with support. There's wisdom in sitting with questions rather than demanding immediate answers. I don't know why I feel nothing is a complete and valid statement. You don't need to justify, explain, or fix it right away. Time reveals things that analysis can't. What feels like permanent numbness at a funeral might soften into subtle sadness months later. What feels like absence might actually be peace. Give yourself space to discover what's true. One final thing I want to address. The fear that feeling nothing now means you'll feel nothing when people you truly love die. This fear keeps you up at night. You worry you're fundamentally broken. But emotional numbness in one situation doesn't predict numbness in all situations. The relationship matters. The circumstances matter. Your emotional state at the time matters. You're not locked into one response forever. I've seen people feel nothing at their parents' funeral and break down completely when their pet dies. I've seen people stoic through multiple human deaths who fall apart at a stranger's kindness. Emotion is contextual and unpredictable. Your capacity for feeling isn't gone. It's just selective right now. And that selectivity might be your mind's way of protecting what matters most, of rationing emotional energy for relationships that are truly alive. So if you're at a funeral right now, standing there feeling nothing while everyone around you weeps, take a breath. You're not broken. You're not heartless. You're not wrong. You're just human, with a human nervous system doing its best to help you survive this moment. Trust your system. Trust your process. Trust that you know what you need better than anyone else does. And when you leave that funeral and return to your life, carry this with you. Grief doesn't have a right way. Loss doesn't have a correct response. Your emotional truth, whatever it is, deserves respect. From others and from yourself. Feeling nothing when someone dies isn't the end of your emotional life. It's just one chapter in a much longer story. And that story gets to be written by you, not by anyone else's expectations of how you should grieve.